Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, Pennsylvania has a nationally watched and very competitive U.S. Senate race. My special guest today is U.S. Congressman Joe Sestak. If you're alive and well, he's the Democratic candidate for the United States Senate. That and more following these words. Oh, by the way, did I say Pennsylvania politics and government? On Pennsylvania Newsmakers, the first and most accurate. We'll see you back in a moment.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back to the program. We're going to get right to these interviews. Look, if you're watching this on WGAL, guess what? TV here in South Central PA, 7:30 in the morning, just before, what's that, the Today Show, and just after Chris Matthews and the new WGAL News. Welcome to our news time spot. 13 years on the air now. Sitting across from me is a guy. You didn't spend you spent more than 13 years in the Navy, didn't you?
31 years. Wonderful years.
Yeah, 31.
I'm a sailor. That's really what I am.
I got that. And you're 2 terms in the Congress. You're now running. You're the giant killer. You beat this guy. His name is Arlen Specter, I think, right? You ran against him and defied odds. Ran against everybody in the world. You ran against the governor. You ran against Arlen. At any rate, let's get to the serious business. All right, this past week you went back to Washington. You cast a very important vote on Medicaid spending and education, some, $26 billion in total. Some of the critics say that all of this is just leading to more spending and more government control of, and you've cast this election as sort of an ideological contest between your opponent. What do you think about the long-term implications of all this spending? Stimulus, a lot of spending, Congressman. What's your sense about that?
Well, my perspective is from my naval days. My very first job in the U.S. Navy during the Vietnam War era was damage control officer. Yeah. If anybody hit the ship with a missile, we had to control it. So my first job, Terry, when I went to Congress, was to control the damage. Those first 6 months after Mr. Bush left office, we lost 3 million Americans out of their jobs. The first 6 months of this year, we regained almost 1 million. We had to do something to control the damage of savage policies that had wrecked our economy. Now what we have to do is exactly what you're saying. This bill that I voted for the other day was completely paid for. We actually decreased the national debt by over $1 billion and yet saved 12,000 Pennsylvanians and their jobs. What I have voted for was to reinstitute, and it's now in law, the requirement that the government has to balance its budget. It has to pay only for what it can afford. Clinton administration had that and gave us 3 budget surpluses. But President Bush, along with my opponent, a man I like, by the way, but I disagree with his principles, said we don't have to have this requirement to balance our budget. And so they doubled our national debt. And now we have to make sure we pay as we go forward. And that's what we have to do.
By my count, however, there have been 11 instances this year where Congress, the House included obviously, has waived the pay-go requirement, arguing emergency, and has spent money. Now, some of it was on the Afghan, some of it was on war spending, to be true, and some critics say that this is really, you're taking food stamp money as far away as 2014, to balance the budget for this, that we now have, notwithstanding the purpose, help people immediately in need, over a $13 trillion debt, which is 50% of GDP growth, that this is more than just sort of helping people in need, that we're mortgaging the future of our country. How do you answer that?
As you know, Mr. Bush gave us an $11 trillion debt. And again, we had to control the damage. 700,000 people in America are losing their job every day. And as you saw the study that came out by John McCain's economic advisor, Mark Zandi, last week, if we hadn't done what we did, we'd have another 8 million Americans unemployed, and gross domestic product would have dropped 6%. Now, it was a job I didn't want to do, but I did it because it was called for. But now what do we have to do is the real question. Small businesses of less than 20 people lost half of the unemployed. My party and the Republicans have to come together and give a tax credit of 15% for every new payroll job that a small business creates. We'd soak up 5 million unemployed in 2 years.
Will that add to the debt?
No, because we would use the $25 billion that's already been outlaid for the TARP. And so what we have to do is guarantee community banks loans. They're not lending to small businesses up to 98%, to credit-worthy small businessmen and women. We slowed the hemorrhaging of jobs. Our ship of state of our economy had been torpedoed. We were sinking. We caulked the holes. Now, Terry, it's the stimulus that must work by using small businesses to create all jobs.
But some of it, I mean, here's where we get here's where we get to the nub of it. I mean, some of this is like, let's take health care. Now, you know, the voters of the country want universal health care. I mean, that was a sort of a popular measure. But when you take health care, when you take the regulation of the investment banks, the overhaul that was done, and you look at the energy bill, we are talking, not arguably, not just helping people in the short run, but the most massive intrusion of government regulation of the private sector in American history. Does that aspect of that concern you, that government will be running so much of everyday life in America, not the private sector?
I come, again, from a background, a breeding ground, like when I took over the Navy's anti-terrorism unit and was on the ground in Afghanistan for a short mission. We don't come from liberal or as a breeding ground for conservatives. We are problem solvers. So when you bring up those three issues, I looked at the problem. Pennsylvanians in the last 8 years had their health premiums go up 100%. Up to 700 Pennsylvanians are losing their health care every day. So the bill that was passed will now decrease our national debt by over $1 trillion. It actually now says, like my daughter, can no longer be denied care for pre-existing conditions, and health insurance companies that were between the doctor and the patient can no longer deny a person for care, and it decreases premiums by up to 10%. So to me, it's not big government or small government, it's effective government. The alternative was another 700 people today would have lost their health care. Now, I believe that the U.S. military gives health care to everybody. That saved my daughter with her brain tumor, not because it's socialist, but because we wanted productive warriors in Pennsylvania. Too many workers are uninsured and we lose productivity.
All right, we're going to run to break, and we'll come back. And I mean, I certainly, you know, you make good points here, but you know, with these insurance exchanges and government regulation, by the way, health insurance premiums are going up even as we speak.
But the
for
law's
employers
not in effect yet.
I understand.
And that's why we need to do this.
Okay, I'm chatting with Congressman Joe Sestak. He's a Democratic candidate for the United States Senate. Back with my interview with the Congressman following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, bringing educational innovation and freedom to the children of Pennsylvania. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by PAConstructionJobs.com. For more information about rewarding careers in the highway construction industry, visit PAConstructionJobs.com. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back with my interview with Congressman Joe Sestak. All right, Congressman, let's switch topics. I'm going to come back to some domestic, but man, I want to talk about the Afghanistan war. The American public now very skeptical of this war. 45% say, we're not sure we should be there. You supported the president's goal of sending 30,000 more troops. You know, 6 Americans, as you know, were ambushed and killed. These were not fighting Americans, and very sad situation. The president called this the right war. Iraq was supposedly the wrong war. You have supported this. What's your sense about what we ought to be doing in Afghanistan?
The only reason to be in Afghanistan is to eradicate al-Qaeda's safe haven in Pakistan. The reason I supported the troop increase was to help seal the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, as Secretary Gates told us in a closed hearing would be done. Convincing the Pakistan, now that the creature they created, the Taliban, was starting to go after them, and there's 35,000 troops of that Taliban over in Pakistan, that they would go after them, and they couldn't escape as we sealed the border in a pincher movement.
Has that been done?
Well, I've written the president several, and also brought up in questions. He promised us metrics by which we would measure whether we were being successful, and there would be no open-ended commitment or a blank check. We have not received the metrics for Pakistan yet. The reason we're going through the Taliban is to get al-Qaeda. That's the only reason to remain there. Yeah. We must get those metrics, because every warrior knows, like when I was on the ground there for a short mission, are we measuring our success? If not, you exit to another
we're not doing this, obviously.
I don't know yet, but it appears, and can we have those metrics? Yes. Are the Pakistanis moving from south to North Waziristan, where the al-Qaeda are?
Your big point is you don't know if we know whether we're meeting our goals or not? Is that your point?
It's the right strategy, I believe, but every strategy has to be assessed.
Okay.
And so we need those metrics. Now, I've written, and General Jones, head of the National Security Council, has come back and has promised us that we will get metrics. But I need to know, because you can't keep pouring money or lives into a strategy that you can't measure success. And that's what we did in that tragic misadventure in Iraq, which was the wrong war. We never finished the job in Afghanistan and let the al-Qaeda get away.
Okay, how about this point now? Do you think that there ought to be, I don't know whether we're going to stick to this firm deadline next summer of pulling our troops out. I don't quite even know what that means. The President has not always been consistent in what he has said about it. What's your position on
My position
next
is,
summer?
no, you have metrics that measure if you're successful. And when the cost of the failure is more than the benefit, then you go to alternative, maybe an exit strategy. But you need the metrics, not a date. Are we doing what has to be done?
So your point is, if the metrics say we're not, looks like we're changing some of the strategy that we've employed, that if we've got to stay there a little longer, that doesn't bother you as long as the goals are...
If we are succeeding in the goal at less cost than if we were to withdraw. When I wrote and was responsible in the Clinton administration as President Clinton's Director for Defense Policy, the national security strategy that we had at the time always said you must have benchmarks and metrics for any conflict to measure if you're being successful or not. If not, then do you need less troops, more troops, or do you need a different strategy? Everyone does that, whether it's business or in war.
All right, we have about a minute left, and then when we come back in the next segment, I want to ask you about the Bush tax cuts and some other domestic things. I want to go to, just for a minute or so, Iran. Would you rule out, would you make a firm statement, yes or no, as to whether you think ultimately we have to use some kind of military action against Iran, depending on what they do with it?
I would never take, Iran cannot have nuclear weapons. And I will not ever take the military option off the table. But having led men and women into conflict, I want to try every means before a military option is used. And therefore, the right approach is to ensure that we could get China and Russia and other nations to apply economic, diplomatic, financial sanctions on her to try.
That's not been successful right now.
No, but the Bush administration never tried it. And we are finally beginning to do some of it. I can't tell you it's going to be successful, but we owe it to our men and women to try to see if we can't stop the pursuit of a nuclear weapon by other means first.
All right, we're going to take a break. I want to come back. I want to ask the Congressman about the Bush tax cuts. The other point is, what does Israel do, and we do, do we, in a sense, unleash Israel? Maybe we don't unleash, maybe they just go ahead and do it without our support, take out these, if they even could take out the nuclear facilities. All right, we'll be back. Congressman Sestak is running for the United States Senate. If you're alive and well here in our state and paying attention to this race, we'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania. working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program. New time, 7:30. Our viewers around the state, you can get it at all their normal times, but here on WGAL, if you're 7:30 in the morning, get up, have your coffee, and join us. We're chatting with Congressman Joe Sestak. All right, I want to ask you about the Bush tax cuts. Now, there's this big debate about whether they should expire or not, and one of the arguments is, well, it's just not the people earning $250,000 or more who are going to pay more taxes. But it'll filter down to these S-corps, you know, the people who, small business, the people you were talking about are going to pay this tax who don't earn $250,000. Mr. Congressman, should the tax cuts expire? What do you think ought to happen to it?
The tax cuts for the middle class have to be extended.
Okay.
In addition, the $800 that we gave back to middle class families has to also, we instituted,
right,
has to be extended, and the $2,500 for their educational opportunities. Now, those who benefited over the 8 years of the Bush administration the most, the
right,
top 1% of those who have income, the multi and the millionaires
right,
themselves, they cannot have another $700 billion given to add to the debt. You know, Congressman Toomey and I have a difference of opinion on this. He proposes a tax that would actually place a tax on gasoline, trips to doctor's offices, and prescription drugs of 35%, but would actually say zero taxes for anyone that gets their investment from Wall Street, dividends, and capital gains. There's a different approach. I believe that small businesses, working families, the middle class should be given the tax cuts and drive wealth up with opportunity. He believes wealth will trickle down.
Right.
But the problem was during the Bush tax cut years, they never paid for the tax cuts. And that's the problem of why our debt doubled. Congressman Toomey, with George Bush, threw out the window the requirement of the Clinton administration to operate the government within its means. It was called pay as you go.
Yeah.
And, that's why
we
we have to go back to that type of an approach.
Yeah, some in your party, however, want to take the capital gains tax up, you know, to 20% from 15%. Now, now that's going to be a lot of middle class folks, a lot of people who have money in the market and their pensions are going to, you know, they cash them out. They're going to pay that tax. Here's what I believe.
There should be zero capital gains tax if you invest in a small business. Why? Small businesses create 80% of all jobs. And in the last 30 years in Pennsylvania, we've had half the growth of small businesses as the national average. Therefore, our job creation has been 30% versus 60% for the nation. Zero capital gains tax if you invest in a small business. It's where you put the tax cut. Okay. And I believe that since the majority of Pennsylvanians work in a small business or own one, that's where the tax cut goes. Not for Wall Street, but for right here.
Okay, we're going to run to, I know this sounds like we have a lot of breaks. Commercial television, we have to pay our bills, but before we do, I have one quick, it's a serious question, but, you know, it's one, I want to stick on the policy, but I have to ask you this. Charlie Rangel, Maxine Waters, Democrats, your caucus in Congress. Charlie Rangel last week gave this rant. He got on the House floor for 30 minutes. I don't know if you were there when he gave that speech. And you know, what should happen to him? I mean, the president says, well, you know, he had this distinguished career. Maybe he should just retire. I mean, you know, that's really what President Obama was saying on the record when he was asked about it. What's your sense about what should happen there?
Here's my sense. Washington's broken. Both parties. Special interests have too much influence. I have actually submitted a bill that says there should be public financing, not contributions coming to people that influence them for campaigns. And there should be an outside ethics committee.
I like that
not
idea.
Just one inside, where you have subpoena power with retired judges that will look at Congress. Congress should be not above the people.
All right. I like that idea. All right. We're talking with Congressman Sestak. Final part of the program after we talk about bills, pay some bills. We'll be back.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Hi, welcome back to the program. A couple of minutes left with Congressman Sestak. All right, I want to go to something again. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have come to you all in Congress and said we need more money. They now want $3.3 billion just for this quarter. By the way, 50% of the mortgages in the United States are controlled by these two big entities. How long do we feed the beast?
You know, and that's the secondary market. We've done a financial reform bill for Wall Street, which was permitted to gamble with our savings because they deregulated it. Now we have to take care of the secondary market of Fannie and Freddie. And anything that we do has to be paid for. Look, the biggest issue right now is how do we get rid of this $15,000 that you, my daughter, myself have to pay for the debt that was added on during the Bush years. We've got to be able to address that. I'm going to come to one other point here. What we need in Washington, D.C. are not people that have some rigid doctrine or ideology and brokers no dissent. Right. We need people who will sit down and look at the problem in a pragmatic way, problem solvers. That's my background, Terry. If we had such damage done to our economy, we slowed the hemorrhaging of jobs. It's tough, but getting fiscal discipline in and then having the right investments, like I mentioned, in small businesses, because the fact is they create 80% of all jobs, is how we can grow jobs, but also just control the spending. And that's the way to the future to compete with China and with India and stop exporting jobs.
But as we leave here, I mean, should we be giving these another $3.3 billion? I mean,
let's pay for it. You know, there are, for example, George Bush, Congressman Toomey voted that we could actually let U.S. companies invest in a foreign factory and get a tax credit of $43 billion. It's closed those tax loopholes. Wall Street, they only pay, if you're managing a hedge fund, they only pay 15% for their taxes when you and everybody else pays much more. Close those tax loopholes. Congressman Toomey and I disagree. He believes that if you give tax breaks to Wall Street and big corporations, wealth might trickle down. Close those and invest. Pay for what we have to and invest in small businesses and the working families.
All right, we're out of time. Hopefully, you know, sometime in October before this race is over, you'll come back and
I'd love to.
We'll update this and see where it's all going.
Thanks, Terry, for the opportunity.
All right, as always, thanks for watching Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and you all stay well.